I used to watch cartoons, oblivious, wonder in my eyes, until that fascination ruined me. Nickelodeon, one of the many cartoon channels I watched growing up, along with the other forerunners of children's TV, Disney, and Cartoon Network. In an online game called Nicktropolis, I was shown an episode of a cartoon known among my friend group at school. And then, it vanished. My name is Josiah Herring. I'm 20 years old, and I'm going to talk about why its film, released 13 years later, looks a little odd. Little odd, that's all I can do. Invader Zim, Danny Phantom, Spectacular Spider-Man, and Pokemon. These are the shows I grew up watching and that shaped my art and animation styles. Most of these shows were taken off the air, and the only one that wasn't has had drastic changes made to their art and animation over the past few years, making it almost unrecognizable from its original state. Not saying the art style's bad, it's beautiful when well done, but it's not what influenced me while growing up to go into the animation field. So imagine my joy when I hear one of the other shows that influenced me growing up was getting a movie planned for theaters, and was being done by its original creators. That's not very common anymore, sadly. Now I'll admit I didn't follow the development of the film like most people did. I knew it was coming out, I just didn't know when, and I didn't find out they decided to dump it onto Netflix instead of theaters until the night it happened. I watched the film and immediately posted this to an animation Facebook group. The new Invader Zim movie was pretty good, but as an animation student, it was pretty easy to see which parts were carefully handcrafted and which parts were rushed. Several scenes were beautiful to look at, but that just made the parts that were tweened way more noticeable. Tweening can look good if done right, that's how I animate most of the time. But when put into a major movie where most of it's done frame by frame, it looks cheap. All I'm saying is that you can definitely tell when they stopped getting theatrical funding and when the studio decided to dump it onto Netflix. That's not to say I didn't like the movie, I felt like I gave that kind of vibe from that post, but there was enough for me to outright love the film. But on an art level, it really disappointed me. It's not like I was expecting the art design from Spider-Verse, but I was expecting something better than the original series at least. This was a film with a film budget, not a TV show. And now with video being able to be displayed in HD, I expected an upgrade. And I got an upgrade. For about 75% of the film. If you haven't seen the film yet, I actually 100% recommend that you go watch it. It's on Netflix, so if you have an account, you have zero reasons to skip out on this. If you're a fan who grew up with the show, you owe it to yourself to watch it. This is the finale we've been waiting for, and I want you to enjoy it without an animation nerd ripping it apart before your eyes. So if you're still watching at this point, it's your own fault. Also, I feel like I should give a spoiler warning. I don't think I really spoiled anything in this script. I try to keep it at least 90% spoiler-free, so, there is still that possible 10%. Just, yeah, you've been warned. Alright, let's do this one last time. Alright, so before I go too far into this discussion, I feel like I should point out the key difference between art and animation. An art style is how it's drawn. The art style in this film has a very slight difference from the one in the original series, but for me, it simply makes the film just look nicer all around. More presentable, more colorful, more welcoming to the eyes. The use of color can be attributed towards the art style, but that's not always the case, as usually there's a separate department specifically for coloring. This is usually done to keep the film consistent. In this case though, I believe the coloring was done by the same people who draw each frame, so I feel it can be attributed to them in this case. Animation, on the other hand, is how the image moves, emphasis on how. There are two main forms of animation, frame by frame and tweening, otherwise known as skeletal animation. Frame by frame is how older shows and movies were done, as they really had no other option. Tweening didn't really come around until the digital age of animation, and that's because of how it's done, but we'll get into that. Frame by frame is exactly what it sounds like. The creators draw each frame individually, and then run them back to back in succession to give them a moving effect. This can be done at different speeds, but the standard is done at 30 different frames per second. However, animation can drop as low as 12 frames per second before our brains really start to notice. A perfect example is 2018's Spider-Verse. All the main Spider people were animated at the regular 30 frames per second. But the new character, Miles, was dropped down to 12 until he finally took that leap of faith and became Spider-Man. This film was able to take something that no one notices and turn it into a major story beat. Crazy. Alternatively, you have tweening, or skeletal rig animation. This type of animation is when you create a specific rig, or a puppet-like system, to make the character move. Imagine how people animate a 3D character, but apply that to 2D animation. This style of work is kind of looked down upon by cartoon critics, simply because it's easier to do, and by extension, cheaper for studios to get away with. It's usually the type of style that most independent animators choose to use for that exact reason. To give you an example, I work with both types of animation. My YouTube intro, playing somewhere between 12 and 13 frames per second, took me about 12 hours to make. This short thing took me 12 hours, compared to this scene I made of a character walking through the rain, which took about the same amount of time, but I was able to make 5 times as long. Doing something like this just makes more sense money-wise, although at the risk of making things look less polished. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying tweening is awful. It can really shine on shows built around the concept. Shows like 16, Total Drama, and Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends are all made with this animation style in mind, and they look great for it. But if a show is specifically made to be done frame by frame, and is forced to switch into this cheaper style of animation, it can result in something looking off. Usually it looks a bit too bouncy, everything feels disjointed from the world around it, and everything almost has a floaty atmosphere around it. However, an art style can be reworked between projects to help the transitioning process. And if it can be done, it can help the project feel less bouncy or disjointed. Just look at the difference between The Lion Guard, a sequel to The Lion King, and the 10th season of Fairly Odd Parents. Both were originally designed to be frame by frame, but one tweaked its art style to be more suitable for tweening, while the other just uses its original designs brought into Adobe Animate. And it looks bouncy! This is all relevant to Invader Zim for a simple reason. I mentioned earlier that the film was originally planned for a theatrical release.
Hey, it's Josiah here in editing. So I made the mistake of not looking into the product I'm reviewing, and apparently I was a little bit wrong on this. The film wasn't meant for a theatrical release, it was actually originally meant to be a television film. Along the way, they decided, no, let's put it on Netflix. And with it going onto a streaming platform instead of television, it probably did get a bigger budget, actually. So when I talk about them lowering the budget to go to Netflix and everything like that, go ahead and swap that around. You can tell what scenes they worked on back at Nickelodeon and what scenes they worked on under Netflix, just because the Netflix ones are going to look a bit better. I just thought I'd mention that now, since I already have everything recorded and I'm in the editing room. I just want to make it clear. I did my research while editing, and I messed up. So there you go.
The film was eventually dumped onto Netflix, and it would make sense that when that decision was made, the budget was probably cut. This resulted in most of the film being beautifully done, frame by frame, but a good 20 to 25% being tweened. And it definitely looks a lot closer to Fairly Odd Parents than The Lion Guard. In their defense, they didn't really have a choice. Most of the film would have probably already been done by the time the change was made, and going back and changing the film's art style would most likely result in needing to redraw the entire film, which would be a complete waste of resources when you already had your budget slashed. Alternatively, if they did change the art to fit the animation, you'd have a bunch of Invader Zim fans at your throats. I mentioned earlier how the art was changed between the film and its original run, and the creators actually have received a little bit of criticism for that, even if the change was only minor, and I'd say almost unnoticeable. So changing it even more for the sake of fitting an animation style would only cause more problems. The creators were at a lose-lose situation here. Do they adjust the art even more to affect the budget? Or do they keep it all at the risk of their animation looking a little wonky? And if you ask me, they actually made the right choice. Only animation nerds would really notice the stiff movements. Any fans wanting a finale to the series they love would get that without having to think too hard about it. So if you grew up with this little alien and was disappointed that you never got to see how the story ended, this film is a beautiful send-off to the characters we came to enjoy back in middle school. One last mission for this sickly green kid, his pet dog, and his best friend Dip. Maybe the movie isn't perfect in every department, but I'll be damned if the creators didn't at least try to give us something that was out of this world. Hey guys, Josiah Herring here. So thank you for watching the video. It really means a lot to me because this took a long time to make. I actually started working on this back in August of last year. So yeah, it was a trip to finish. I probably could have finished it back in September, but my plan was actually to outsource for that beginning animation. I was going to have a friend of mine do it, and then I was going to credit her here. But I actually quit my job, like, right around the time where I was working on it. So my funds were a little lacking, and then Christmas came and all that stuff. And I just figured, I need to get this video out. I've been working on this for way too long. Maybe I'll work with them on a future video, but I just didn't have the money for them to help out this time. Well, if you liked the video, I really hope you leave me a like. That's very much appreciated. It really helps me out. And if you really enjoyed it, feel free to subscribe. You don't have to subscribe, but if you don't, I will launch my dog into space.
Excellent! Me! Let me do one! I launched that pug into space. I thought you liked that pig. Why'd I do that?